The stars have always been patient teachers. They burn for billions of years, indifferent to the civilizations that rise and fall beneath their light, and in their silence they hold truths that the young never understand and the old forget too late. I have watched 11,000 years of starlight wash across the observation deck of vessels bearing the sigil of the Vathari ascendancy. I have seen empires bloom like phosphorescent algae across the galactic rim, and I have watched them dim into the quiet dark of forgotten history. I believed in the arrogance of my people's eternal reign, that we had transcended the cycle, that we had become the stars themselves, permanent, luminous, beyond the reach of entropy. My name is Keith Valinor, though the syllables would twist strangely in a human mouth, and I suppose now it matters little what I was called in the language of a dying people. I was a remembrancer of the Seventh Circle, keeper of the Ascendancy's deepest histories, guardian of truths so old that even our eldest had forgotten they were once merely theories. For 4,000 years, I catalogued the rise and fall of lesser species, recording their struggles with the clinical detachment of a scholar observing insects beneath magnification. I wrote of their wars, their brief moments of brilliance, their inevitable collapse. I never imagined I would become the subject of such a record. The humans have a word for what I am now. They call it refugee. I find I cannot speak the word without my throat tightening in a way that my species was never meant to experience. We were built for permanence, our bones laced with minerals that would outlast mountains, our minds capable of holding memories across millennia without degradation. We were not built for this, for huddling in the dim corridors of an alien station, for watching the last of my people shuffle past with eyes that no longer hold the light of 11,000 years of accumulated wisdom. We were not built for defeat. And yet here I stand, on a human station called Meridian's Rest, watching through a viewport as the last Vathari evacuation ships limp towards safety. Behind them, invisible against the black, but burning bright in my memory, lies the corpse of everything we ever were. The hollow came without warning. No, that is not true. That is the lie we tell ourselves to sleep. The hollow came with warnings we chose not to hear, signals we dismissed as impossible, evidence we buried beneath layers of bureaucratic arrogance. They came from the spaces between stars, from dimensions our science had declared purely theoretical, and they did not come to conquer. Conquest implies the desire to rule what remains. The hollow came to erase. I remember the first report. I was in the archive of perpetual knowledge, cross-referencing a text on the migratory patterns of the Krethnali, a species that had gone extinct before humanity's ancestors had learned to walk upright. A junior archivist approached me with trembling hands and a data tablet displaying readings from the outer threshold. "Remembrancer," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We've lost contact with the threshold stations, all 17 of them, simultaneously." I remember looking up from my work with irritation. The outer threshold was far from the centers of power, populated by miners and patrol fleets of little strategic importance. Communication failures were uncommon, but not unheard of. "Solar interference," I said, "or equipment failure. File a maintenance request and return to your duties." She did not move. Her eyes, large and luminescent as all Vathari eyes are, held something I had never seen in a member of our species. It took me a long moment to recognize it as fear. "Remembrancer, the stations didn't go silent.
The last transmission from Threshold 7. She swallowed. They were screaming, and then the screaming stopped, and there was only static that moved, static that had a pattern, like it was looking for something.
I dismissed her. I returned to my work on the Krethnali, and 3 days later, the Hollow reached the first of our core worlds. The Fenyar Prime fell in 11 hours.
11 hours. A world that had stood for 9,000 years, that had birthed the first Vathari philosophers and housed the original temples of our ascended faith. A world of 3 billion souls and architectural wonders that had taken millennia to perfect. 11 hours, and it was nothing but a sphere of gray ash, orbiting a star that no longer recognized the civilization that had named it. The war, if it could be called a war, lasted 18 months. We fought with weapons that could shatter moons. We deployed fleets that had never known defeat across 1,000 campaigns. We called upon allies from the Concord of 12, civilizations nearly as old and powerful as our own. The Kretheni sent their world ships. The Malori committed their entire warrior caste. The Shenthi opened their forbidden arsenals, weapons they had sworn never to use again after the Purging Wars.
It was not enough.
The Hollow consumed the Kretheni world ships as if they were fuel. The Malori warriors died in their millions, their legendary discipline useless against an enemy that did not fight but simply ended. The Shenthi weapons, devices capable of unmaking the fundamental forces of reality, functioned precisely as designed. They tore holes in space-time, unleashed energies that should have obliterated any conventional force. The Hollow absorbed it all, and then they came for the Shenthi homeworld. I was aboard the Perpetual Vigil when we received word that the Concord had fallen. 12 civilizations, some older than humanity's recorded history by a factor of 100. Trillions of lives across hundreds of worlds. Knowledge accumulated across tens of thousands of years. Gone. Not defeated. Erased, as if they had never existed at all.
The Ascendancy Council made the only decision left to us. We would flee. We would scatter to the furthest reaches of known space and pray that the Hollow would not follow. We would abandon everything we had built and hope that somewhere, somehow, we might find a corner of the galaxy dark enough to hide.
The distress signal was my idea. In my desperation, I remembered an obscure protocol from the early days of galactic expansion, a universal frequency designed to reach any species capable of receiving it, regardless of their technological base. It was meant to be a final resort, a call for aid that transcended politics and borders. We had used it once, 12,000 years ago, when a stellar event threatened one of our colony ships. Help had come then, from a species now long extinct, and we had survived. I never intended for humans to receive it.
The signal was calibrated for the old powers, the Concord civilizations, the independent empires of the Galactic Core, the ancient machine minds that drifted through the void. We knew humans existed, of course. They had appeared on our charts perhaps 3 centuries ago, when their first faster-than-light vessels stumbled into territories we had mapped before their species had discovered fire.
We had observed them from a distance, as one might observe a new strain of bacteria, with clinical interest and no particular concern. They were young, impossibly, almost absurdly young. Their recorded history spanned barely 10,000 years, and their spacefaring civilization was measured in mere centuries. They had fought wars among themselves, petty conflicts over resources and ideology that would have embarrassed even the least sophisticated Vathari child. They had no psychic abilities, no natural longevity, no biological advantages whatsoever.
They were soft, fragile things, with lifespans so brief that our scholars debated whether they were truly sapient or merely very clever animals operating on instinct. We had ignored them because they did not matter. The Concorde had ignored them for the same reason. What could such a species possibly offer to civilizations that had mastered the fundamental forces of the universe? And so, when our distress signal propagated through space, we did not think of them. We thought of the great powers, the ancient ones, the species whose names were written in the very structure of galactic civilization. We hoped against hope that someone would answer, that somewhere a force existed capable of standing against the hollow.
No one answered. No one except the humans.
The message arrived 3 days after we had given up hope. I was in the command center of the Perpetual Vigil, watching as our navigators plotted desperate courses toward the galactic rim, when the communications officer suddenly went rigid. "Remembrancer," she said, her voice strange. "We're receiving a response to the distress signal."
I felt something I had not felt in centuries. Hope. Irrational, painful hope that perhaps one of the great powers had survived, that help was coming, that we were not alone.
"Origin?" I demanded. She hesitated. "The signal originates from the Soul Sector, from Earth."
The hope died as quickly as it had been born. Earth, the human homeworld. I remember feeling a strange mixture of emotions, disbelief, irritation, even a dark amusement. Of all the species in the galaxy, the ones who answered our call for salvation were the ones least capable of providing it.
"Play the message," I said, expecting nothing.
The voice that filled the command center was calm. Calm in a way that felt almost offensive given the circumstances. It spoke in flawless Vathari, not the trade pigeon that lesser species used, but proper high Vathari, with correct grammatical structures and appropriate tonal markers.
This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Coalition. We have received your distress signal and understand your situation. Coordinates for Meridian Station are attached. Proceed there at best speed. We will provide shelter, supplies, and medical assistance to all refugees. You are not alone. That was all. No questions about what we faced, no demands for payment or political concessions, no boasts about what they could offer. Just a calm voice, coordinates, and a simple statement. You are not alone. I almost didn't go. What was the point? We were fleeing an enemy that had devoured civilizations 100 times more powerful than humanity. Taking shelter with them would be like hiding from a wildfire in a paper house. At best, we would delay the inevitable by a few days. At worst, we would lead the hollow directly to them, and another species would be added to the list of the erased. But we had nowhere else to go. Our fuel was depleted, our ships damaged from running battles with hollow outriders. The coordinates led to a region of space we had never bothered to explore in detail. Too young, too undeveloped, too unimportant. And some small, irrational part of me wanted to see them, to look upon these brief, fragile creatures and understand why they would answer a call that was so clearly not meant for them. Meridian Station hung in the void like a question mark made of metal and light. It was not what I expected. I had imagined something crude, scaffolding and exposed conduits, the rough functionality of a young species still learning to build in the vacuum. Instead, the station was elegant in a utilitarian way, all clean lines and efficient geometries.
It was not beautiful in the way Vathari architecture was beautiful, with our sweeping organic curves and crystalline spires. But there was a purposefulness to its design that spoke of a species that had learned to make every resource count. The docking procedures were handled with an efficiency that surprised me. Human traffic controllers guided our battered fleet into berths with the precision of choreographers, somehow finding space for vessels they had never seen before, adapting their docking clamps on the fly to match our configurations. Within hours, 300,000 Vathari refugees were being processed through airlocks into the station's interior. I was among the last to disembark, along with the other members of the surviving Remembrance Council. We were met at the airlock by a human female in a gray uniform, with short, cropped dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything without betraying any reaction. "Remembrancer Kethva Lenore," she said, pronouncing my name with only a slight imprecision. "I'm Commander Lynn Hayes, Station Coordinator. Admiral Chen sends her apologies for not greeting you personally. She's currently in a strategic briefing. I've been asked to see to your immediate needs and answer any questions you might have." I studied her. Humans were even stranger in person than the recordings had suggested. So small, she barely reached my chest, and I am not particularly tall among my people. Her skin was a warm brown, her features arranged in patterns that my mind struggled to read. We Vathari communicate much through subtle shifts in skin luminescence, through the play of light across our crystalline bone structure. Humans had none of that. Their faces were masks of flesh, and I found I could not determine her emotional state at all. "Commander Hayes," I said, "I must speak with your admiral immediately. There are matters of critical importance." "I understand," she said, and her voice carried a gentleness that caught me off guard. "You've been running for a long time. You've lost more than I can imagine. But right now, your people need food, medical attention, and rest. The Admiral will meet with you as soon as her briefing concludes. In the meantime, please, let us help you." There was something in the way she said it. Not pity, precisely, though pity would have been expected and appropriate. Something more complex, as if she understood our situation in a way that went beyond mere sympathy. I wanted to argue. I wanted to demand to see whoever was in charge, to explain the magnitude of what we faced, to make them understand that their calm efficiency was a form of insanity in the face of an oncoming apocalypse. But I was tired, more tired than I had ever been in 4,000 years of existence, and my people needed help. "Very well," I said. "Lead the way." The station's interior was another surprise. I had expected cramped quarters, minimal amenities, the kind of brutal practicality that a young civilization would prioritize. Instead, the corridors were wide and well lit, with careful attention paid to color and texture. There were plants everywhere, actual living vegetation, carefully maintained in hydroponic systems that seemed far more advanced than I would have expected from human technology. And there were windows, real windows, not view screens, offering glimpses of the stars beyond. But it was the humans themselves that unsettled me most. They moved through the corridors with a quiet purpose, stepping aside to let our ragged procession pass. None of them stared, though we must have been a strange sight. Tall, luminescent beings with skin that shifted color with each emotion, wrapped in the tattered remains of formal robes designed for a civilization that no longer existed. They nodded to us. Some offered small smiles. A few spoke words of greeting in heavily accented Vathari. And in their eyes, I saw something I did not expect. Recognition. Not the distant curiosity of observers witnessing an alien species for the first time, but something deeper. as if they understood on some fundamental level what it meant to be us in this moment. Commander Hayes led us to a large habitation section that had been hastily converted for our needs. The environmental controls had been adjusted to match Vethari preferences, lower gravity, higher oxygen content, and temperature ranges that would have been uncomfortable for humans. Food synthesizers had been programmed with approximations of our cuisine. Sleeping areas had been configured with the angled surfaces our physiology required.
"How did you know?" I asked, unable to keep the suspicion from my voice. "How did you know our environmental requirements, our dietary needs? We have had no contact with your species beyond the most superficial."
"We pay attention," Commander Hayes said simply. "Your ships broadcast a great deal of information in their standard operating protocols: atmospheric composition, gravitational settings, biological waste signatures. We've been preparing since we received your distress signal. Some of it is guesswork, and I apologize in advance if we've gotten anything wrong. Please don't hesitate to tell us if adjustments are needed." I stared at her. 3 days. They had received our signal 3 days ago, and in that time they had prepared habitation for 300,000 refugees of an alien species they had never formally contacted, configuring everything from atmospheric processors to food synthesis to sleeping arrangements.
"That's sufficient. I managed."
Something flickered across her face. Amusement, perhaps, though I couldn't be certain. "We've had practice," she said. "The Kritheni refugees arrived 2 weeks ago. The Mallory survivors came 5 days after that. You're not the first, Remembrancer, and I don't think you'll be the last." I felt the words like a physical blow. The Kritheni, the Mallory, they had survived. Not all of them, not even most of them, if the numbers Commander Hayes mentioned were accurate. But some had escaped. Some had found their way here, to this small station orbiting an unremarkable star, in a sector of space that the Concord had never bothered to map in detail.
"How many?" I asked, my voice rough. "How many have come?"
She consulted a tablet she carried. "As of this morning, we're housing refugees from 14 different species, approximately 2 million individuals total. More are arriving daily."
2 million. From civilizations that had once numbered in the trillions. It was nothing. It was everything.
"The Hollow," I said. "You know what pursues us."
"We know," she said. "Not everything, not yet, but enough. The survivors had been sharing information, and we've been piecing together a picture." She paused, and for the first time I saw something crack in her professional composure, a tightness around the eyes, a slight clench of the jaw. "We know that what's coming is unlike anything the galaxy has faced. We know that every major power that tried to stand against it has fallen.
And we know that it will reach this sector within 3 weeks if current projections hold."
"Then why are you here?" The question burst from me before I could stop it. "Why are you taking in refugees? Why are you preparing habitation and synthesizing food and offering comfort? You should be running. You should be taking every ship you have and fleeing to the furthest edge of the galaxy. You cannot fight the Hollow. No one can fight the Hollow. All you can do is delay them, and even that—"
"Remembrancer." Her voice was quiet, but it stopped me mid-sentence. "I understand that you've seen terrible things. I understand that you've lost more than anyone should have to lose. But I need you to listen to me very carefully." She met my eyes, and I realized that what I had mistaken for calm was something else entirely. It was control. Absolute, deliberate control over every muscle in her face, every inflection in her voice. The control of someone who had learned, through long and bitter experience, to never let their true emotions show.
"We are not going to run," she said. "We are going to fight.
And before you tell me that fighting is impossible, that we don't understand what we're facing, that we're too young and too weak and too foolish to comprehend the scale of the threat, I need you to know that we've heard it all before. We've heard it from the Krytheni and the Mallory and every other species that has come through our airlocks with haunted eyes and broken spirits. We've listened. We've learned.
And we are not going to run.
I wanted to argue with her. I wanted to explain in detail exactly what the Hollow had done to civilizations that made humanity look like children playing with toys. I wanted to list the weapons that had failed, the strategies that had proven useless, the sheer mathematical impossibility of resistance.
But something in her eyes stopped me, something ancient and familiar, though I could not immediately place it. "The Admiral will see you tomorrow morning," she said. "Please rest. You're safe here. For now, that's enough." I did not sleep that night. Instead, I wandered the station, observing the humans as they went about their incomprehensible routines. I saw them working in shifts, maintaining equipment, reviewing data, training in simulators that projected scenarios I could not interpret. I saw them eating together in communal spaces, talking in low voices, occasionally laughing at jokes I couldn't understand. I saw a young human female, barely more than a child by my reckoning, though with humans it was difficult to tell, sitting with a group of Krytheni refugees. The Krytheni were massive beings, insectoid in appearance, with chitinous exoskeletons and compound eyes that reflected light in complex patterns. They had been warriors, proud and fierce, and now they huddled together like frightened larvae, their great claws wrapped around their thoraxes in gestures of self-comfort. The human child was reading to them, reading in halting but comprehensible Krytheni from a book of what appeared to be human children's stories. The Krytheni listened with an attention that seemed almost pathetic in its intensity, their compound eyes fixed on the small figure before them. When the story ended, one of the Krytheni reached out with a claw that could have bisected the child with a casual gesture, but instead, with infinite gentleness, it touched the book she held. "More?" it asked, its translator rendering the word in a voice like grinding stone. "Please, more stories?" The child smiled. "Tomorrow," she said. "I'll come back tomorrow with more. I promise." I watched her leave, and I watched the Krytheni settle into something like peace, and I realized that I did not understand humans at all. The next morning, Commander Hayes escorted me to the Admiral's office. It was a modest space by Vathari standards, a desk, some chairs, view screens displaying tactical information I couldn't interpret. Admiral Chen stood as I entered, and I was struck again by how unremarkable humans appeared. She was older than Commander Hayes, with gray streaking her dark hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of years of difficult decisions. She wore the same gray uniform as everyone else on the station, with no ornamentation to indicate her rank beyond a simple insignia on her collar. "Remembrancer Keth Valinor," she said, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit. I apologize for the delay in meeting with you. I imagine you have questions." "Many," I said, lowering myself into the chair. It was not designed for Vathari physiology, but someone had added a cushion that made it tolerable, another small act of accommodation that I was beginning to recognize as characteristic of these strange beings. But the most pressing is this. Why? Why are you helping us? We ignored your species for centuries. We considered you beneath our notice. And now, when we come to you as beggars, you welcome us with open arms. What do you want?" Admiral Chen's expression did not change.
She seemed to consider the question seriously, as if it deserved genuine reflection rather than a diplomatic non-answer. "What do I want?" she repeated. "I want my grandchildren to grow up in a galaxy where people help each other. I want the species that survive this crisis to remember that when everything seemed lost, someone reached out a hand. I want—" She paused, and something shifted in her eyes. "I want to do what's right, Remembrancer. I know that sounds naive. I know that in your experience, civilizations don't operate on such simple principles. But humans are young, as you've no doubt observed. We haven't yet learned to be as cynical as we should be." "That is not an answer," I said. "That is a deflection." She smiled, and it was a strange expression, warm and sad at the same time. "You're right. The full answer is more complicated. We help because we can, because we have resources and space and the ability to make a difference. Because if our positions were reversed, if humanity were fleeing an extinction-level threat and the Vathari had the power to help, I would want you to help us, even if we had spent centuries ignoring you, even if we had considered you beneath our notice." She leaned forward. "We also help because we're not as helpless as you think, and that brings me to the questions I need to ask you." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Here it was, then, the true purpose of this meeting. They wanted information, strategic data, weapon schematics, the accumulated knowledge of our dying civilization. It was what any rational species would want. It was what I would have wanted in their position. "Ask," I said. "The Hollow," Admiral Chen said. "Everything the survivors have told us suggests they operate differently from any threat the Concord has faced before. They don't conquer. They don't negotiate. They don't even seem to have goals in any conventional sense. They simply erase. What do you know about their origins, their motivations, their weaknesses, if any?" "Nothing," I admitted, and the word tasted like ash. "We studied them for 18 months while they consumed our civilization. Our finest scientists, our most advanced instruments, our oldest and wisest scholars, all of them failed to produce a single actionable insight. The Hollow are not a species in any meaningful sense. They are more like a phenomenon, a force of nature. They exist to end, and that is all." "And the weapons you used against them? The planet killers, the dimensional disruptors, the reality-altering devices the Shenthi deployed?" "All failed. Some slowed them temporarily. Most had no effect whatsoever. A few, the most powerful, seemed to feed them, to make them stronger." I shook my head. I have watched civilizations that mastered forces beyond human comprehension throw everything they had at the Hollow. It was like watching children throw pebbles at an ocean. Admiral Chen nodded slowly. She did not seem surprised or discouraged by my words. If anything, she seemed to be confirming something she already suspected. "What about unconventional approaches?" she asked. "Communication attempts? Offers of surrender or negotiation? Anything that treated them as something other than an enemy to be destroyed?" I stared at her. "You cannot communicate with the Hollow. They do not have language. They do not have minds in any sense we could recognize. They are—" "Humor me," she said. "Did anyone try?" I thought back through the records. The Concord's response to the Hollow had been immediate and militaristic. Overwhelming force deployed with maximum efficiency. It was the obvious approach, the only rational approach. "No," I said slowly. "No, I don't believe anyone attempted communication. There would have been no point. You cannot negotiate with a fire. You cannot reason with a vacuum." "Perhaps,"
Admiral Chen said. Or perhaps everyone assumed that because it seemed impossible, it wasn't worth trying. She stood and walked to a view screen that displayed a star chart I didn't recognize. We've been studying the data your survivors provided. The Hollow's advance is not random. There are patterns, subtle but present. They prioritize certain targets over others. They respond to certain stimuli in consistent ways. That suggests, at minimum, some form of decision-making process.
Some form of intelligence, even if it's nothing like our own. And you believe you can communicate with them? I could not keep the incredulity from my voice. You, who have barely mastered interstellar travel, believe you can succeed where the combined wisdom of the Concord failed? She turned to face me, and again I saw that strange expression. Not offended by my condescension, but not accepting it either. I believe we can try. I believe that sometimes the obvious approach fails because it is obvious. I believe that a species with nothing to lose might be willing to attempt things that a civilization with everything to protect would consider too risky.
And if communication fails? If the Hollow cannot be reasoned with, as I have told you?
Admiral Chen smiled, and there was something in that smile that made me deeply uncomfortable. Then we fight. And we fight in ways that the Concord never considered, because the Concord was fighting to preserve something. We will be fighting for something entirely different.
What? Survival, she said. Not of our civilization, or our territory, or our way of life. Just survival. The raw, ugly, desperate struggle to continue existing for one more day. Humanity has some experience with that.
I wanted to dismiss her words as the bravado of a species too young to understand what it faced, but something in her voice gave me pause, a weight that seemed incongruous with her species' brief history. "Tell me," I said, and I heard my own voice as if from a great distance. "Tell me about humanity's experience with survival." Admiral Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. Our homeworld almost killed us, several times. Ice ages that lasted thousands of years, supervolcanic eruptions that blotted out the sun, asteroid impacts that ended entire ecological eras, and that was before we developed the technology to kill ourselves. We split the atom, Remembrancer. We built weapons capable of ending all life on Earth, and then we pointed them at each other. For decades, our species lived under the shadow of self-inflicted extinction. She moved to another view screen, this one showing images I didn't recognize. Burnt cities, mushroom clouds, skeletal figures in wastelands of ash. "We did not always avoid the worst," she continued. "The 30 years' winter, the collapse of 2157, the scourge, names that mean nothing to you, but everything to us. Times when we came within a hair's breadth of ending ourselves. Times when we had to claw our way back from the edge with nothing but stubborn refusal to die." The images changed again. Construction, rebuilding, people working together in the rubble of destroyed cities. Children playing in parks that had been craters a generation before. "We are not a species that believes in impossible odds," Admiral Chen said. "Because we have beaten impossible odds before, not through superior technology or ancient wisdom or cosmic power, through sheer, bloody-minded refusal to accept that something cannot be done. That is what we bring to this fight, Remembrancer. Not weapons, not fleets, stubbornness." I said nothing. I could not think of what to say. This was not how the powerful spoke. The powerful spoke of resources, of strategic advantages, of calculated probabilities. They did not speak of desperation and stubbornness as if they were virtues.
But then I reminded myself, the powerful had already lost this war.
"There is something else," Admiral Chen said, her voice shifting back to a more businesslike tone. "Something I need to ask you, though I want to be clear that your answer will not affect our hospitality. You and your people are welcome here regardless of what you decide." "Ask." "We are preparing a response to the Hollow. It will require resources, coordination, and sacrifice on a scale that humanity has never attempted. We would welcome the participation of any refugees who are willing and able to contribute. Your knowledge, your experience, your perspective, all of it could be invaluable." She paused. "But I will not command it. I will not coerce it. If your people wish only to rest, to grieve, to recover, that is their right. We will protect you regardless." I felt something strange in my chest, an emotion I could not immediately identify. It took me a long moment to recognize it as shame.
For 11,000 years, the Vathari Ascendancy had operated on principles of calculated self-interest. We formed alliances when they benefited us. We aided other species when such aid served our purposes. We protected our territories with ruthless efficiency and expanded when expansion was advantageous. It was the logical approach, the successful approach.
And now a species we had dismissed as beneath our notice was offering us unconditional sanctuary, while simultaneously asking, with no pressure whatsoever, if we would like to help them attempt the impossible.
"I will speak with my people," I said. "I cannot promise their participation. They are broken in ways that may not heal."
"I understand," Admiral Chen said. "Take whatever time you need." I rose to leave, then hesitated at the door. "Admiral, the distress signal I sent, it was not meant for you. It was calibrated for the old powers, the Concord civilizations. Your species should not have been able to receive it." She smiled slightly. "We received it because we were listening. We've been listening for a long time, Remembrancer, to everything. It's one of the advantages of being considered beneath notice. No one bothers to encrypt their communications when they think you're too primitive to understand them." I stared at her, and something clicked into place in my mind. A piece of a puzzle I had not realized I was assembling. "How long?" I asked. "How long have you been listening?"
"Since we first developed radio," she said, "about 400 years by your calendar, we've learned a great deal about the galaxy in that time, its politics, its powers, its blind spots."
"And you never made contact, never revealed what you knew?"
"We weren't ready, and frankly, we weren't sure the galaxy was ready for us." She shrugged. "Humanity has a difficult relationship with first impressions. We've learned to be patient." I left the Admiral's office with more questions than I had entered with, but for the first time since the fall of Vethanyar Prime, I felt something other than despair. I felt curiosity.
The days that followed were unlike anything in my long experience. I watched as humans went about the business of preparing for war against an existential threat, and I found myself constantly revising my assumptions about their species.
They did not panic. They did not argue over resources or precedence or strategic priorities. They worked together with an efficiency that would have impressed the most disciplined Vathari military unit. But it was not the cold efficiency of automatons following orders. It was something warmer, something that seemed to emerge naturally from their interactions.
I saw human engineers consulting with Crytheni survivors about the properties of hollow material, treating the shattered warriors with a respect that seemed to revive something in them. I saw human scientists working alongside Mallory mystics, combining empirical methodology with intuitive perception in ways that should have been contradictory, but somehow were not. I saw human doctors adapting their medical knowledge to treat species they had never encountered before, learning new physiologies in hours rather than years.
And I saw human soldiers training. That was what disturbed me most.
They trained in simulators that projected scenarios based on survivor accounts of the Hollow. They trained knowing that every tactic they developed had already failed when employed by more advanced civilizations. They trained with a grim determination that I slowly began to recognize as something more than bravery.
It was acceptance. They had accepted that they would probably die, and they were training anyway.
A week after my arrival, I attended a briefing at Admiral Chen's invitation. The room was filled with officers from the human fleet, along with representatives from several refugee species. I was surprised to see Crytheni commanders there, and Mallory strategists, and even a delegation of Shenty scientists. They sat alongside the humans as equals, their input requested and valued.
Admiral Chen stood at the head of the room, a holographic display showing the projected path of the Hollow advance.
Current estimates put the Hollow at our perimeter in 18 days, she said. 17 if they accelerate, which they have done consistently when approaching populated systems. We have that long to prepare our response.
A human officer raised a hand. Admiral, what exactly is our response? With respect, everything we've learned suggests that conventional military action is ineffective against this threat.
Conventional military action is ineffective, Admiral Chen agreed, which is why we won't be relying on it. She touched a control, and the display shifted. What I'm about to share is classified at the highest level. It does not leave this room.
The hologram showed a schematic I did not recognize, a device of some kind surrounded by technical specifications in a human script I could not read.
12 years ago, one of our deep space probes encountered an anomaly in the Kepler 442 system. It took us 3 years to understand what we had found, another 7 to develop the technology you see here. She paused. We found a hollow fragment.
The room went silent. I felt my hearts, both of them, skip in their rhythm.
A fragment, Admiral Chen continued, not a living specimen, but a remnant. Dead, if that word means anything to entities like the Hollow. We believe it was left behind during an incursion that predates even the oldest Concord records, millions of years old, perhaps billions. Why didn't you share this? The question came from a Crytheni commander, her translator rendering the words with an edge of accusation. If you had this knowledge.
We didn't understand what we had until it was too late to matter, Admiral Chen said. And frankly, Commander, who would we have shared it with? The Concord considered us primitives. Any attempt to contact your governments would have been ignored, or worse, seen as an attempt to trick you into revealing sensitive information.
The Crytheni had no response to that. Neither did I. What we learned from the fragment confirmed something I mentioned to Remembrancer Kethvalinor, Admiral Chen continued. The Hollow are not random. They have patterns, preferences, responses. They can be modeled. And if they can be modeled, they can be predicted. And if they can be predicted, they can be manipulated, I heard myself say. You found a way to communicate with them. Admiral Chen looked at me, and I saw something new in her eyes. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. Not communicate exactly, she said, but influence, yes.
The device we've developed broadcasts on frequencies that the hollow perceive. We can't make them understand language, but we can make them hesitate, reconsider. In testing, we've been able to redirect hollow movement away from targeted locations.
You've tested this? A Malari strategist leaned forward. On actual hollow entities?
On simulations based on the fragment's properties. We haven't had the opportunity for field testing. Admiral Chen's expression hardened. In 18 days, we'll get that opportunity, whether we're ready or not.
The briefing continued, but I was no longer fully present. My mind was racing, trying to process what I had heard. Humanity had found a hollow fragment 12 years ago. They had studied it, developed technology from it, prepared for this moment. While the Concord was ignoring them, dismissing them, considering them beneath notice, they had been learning, watching, preparing.
And they had told no one. I stayed after the briefing ended, waiting until the room had cleared. Admiral Chen noticed me lingering and raised an eyebrow.
Remembrancer, something on your mind?
Why didn't you warn us? The words came out harsher than I intended. You had 12 years. You knew something was coming. You could have... Warned you of what? Admiral Chen's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now. A threat we barely understood ourselves? A fragment we couldn't explain to our own scientists, let alone to civilizations that would have dismissed anything we said as primitive superstition? She shook her head. We tried, Remembrancer. 18 months ago, when the first reports of hollow activity reached us through the communication channels we'd been monitoring, we sent messages to every Concord species we could reach. We were ignored, every single time. I opened my mouth to respond, but she continued. The Krythony High Command received our warning 6 days before their world ships were destroyed. They filed it under human propaganda and took no action. The Malori received our analysis of hollow movement patterns 8 days before their homeworld fell. They forwarded it to a junior clerk who forgot to read it. Her voice remained calm, but I could hear the anger beneath. We tried to help. You didn't want our help. So we did what we always do. We prepared to help ourselves. The shame I had felt in our first meeting returned, sharper now. I did not know. No, you didn't. Admiral Chen sighed, and some of the tension left her shoulders. I'm not trying to make you feel guilty, Remembrancer. What's done is done. The question now is what we do going forward, and that's a question I'd like your input on. My input? I could not hide my confusion. I have already told you everything I know about the Hollow. What more could I possibly contribute? Your perspective, she said simply. You've watched civilizations rise and fall for 4,000 years. You understand how power works, how cultures function, how species respond to crisis. That knowledge could be invaluable in the coming days. She paused. Also, frankly, I could use someone to talk to who understands the weight of what we're attempting, someone who has experienced loss on this scale. My officers are dedicated, but they're young. They don't fully grasp what we're fighting for. I considered her words. Something had shifted in my perception of this human, of her entire species. They were not the naive primitives I had assumed. They were something else entirely, something I did not yet have a name for. Very well, I said. I will help however I can. In the days that followed, I worked alongside the humans in ways I never could have imagined. I shared the knowledge of the Remembrance archives, histories, analyses, patterns of civilizational behavior that I had spent millennia accumulating. I advised on Vathari psychology,
helping the humans understand how best to integrate our refugees into their preparations.
I attended strategy sessions, offering perspectives that the humans had not considered because they came from a species that had never experienced interstellar war on this scale.
And slowly, I began to understand what made humanity different. It was not any single quality. It was not their technology, which remained crude by Concord standards. It was not their military prowess, which was untested against true existential threats. It was not their wisdom, which was limited by their brief existence. It was their unity. I had seen many species work together. The Concord itself was proof that cooperation was possible across vast differences in biology and culture. But the Concord had always been a structure of convenience, an alliance of self-interested parties who cooperated because cooperation was more profitable than conflict.
Humanity was different. They cooperated because they believed in cooperation. Their unity was not strategic. It was instinctive, woven into the fabric of their species' identity. They had fought wars among themselves, yes. They had divided into factions and nations and ideologies. But beneath all those divisions, there was something else. A fundamental recognition that they were one species, one family, one people.
And when the universe threatened them, they remembered that.
I saw it in the way their fleet commanders deferred to Admiral Chen, not out of fear or obligation, but out of genuine trust. I saw it in the way their engineers worked 20-hour shifts, not because they were ordered to, but because they understood what was at stake. I saw it in the way their soldiers trained knowing they would probably die, and trained anyway, because they believed that their sacrifice might mean something.
It was irrational. It was inefficient. It was beautiful.
10 days before the Hollow were projected to arrive, something unexpected happened. A human scout ship returned from the void with news that sent shockwaves through the station.
They had found survivors.
Not refugees fleeing the Hollow advance, but survivors from within Hollow territory. Ships that should have been destroyed, populations that should have been erased, somehow persisting in the heart of the enemy's domain.
I was in the command center when Admiral Chen received the report. I watched her face as she read the data, looking for some sign of what it meant. Her expression remained controlled, but something flickered in her eyes.
"How is this possible?" I asked. "The Hollow do not leave survivors. They do not bypass targets. They erase everything in their path."
"Apparently not everything," Admiral Chen murmured. She looked up at her tactical officer. "Bring up the locations of the survivor signals."
The holographic display shifted, showing a map of the space the Hollow had already consumed. Scattered across it were pinpricks of light, dozens, perhaps hundreds of them. Life signs where there should be nothing but void.
"They're in the spaces between," the tactical officer reported. "Asteroid fields, nebulae, regions with high electromagnetic interference, places the Hollow seemed to have overlooked."
"Or avoided," Admiral Chen said. She turned to a Shenthi scientist who had been working with her team. "Doctor, you mentioned that the Hollow have preferences, that they prioritize certain targets. Is it possible that they also have aversions, places they choose not to go?"
The Shenthi's tentacles writhed in a gesture of contemplation. "It is not impossible. Our studies of Hollow behavior were limited by the pace of their advance. We did not have time to identify negative patterns, only positive ones. But if they are avoiding certain locations,
"Then those locations might tell us something about what the Hollow actually are," Admiral Chen finished, "or what they're not, or what they fear." The word hung in the air.
Fear. Could the Hollow fear anything? The question seemed absurd, and yet— "We need to rescue them," Admiral Chen said. "The survivors. Every ship we can spare, every transport we can commandeer. If they've found places the Hollow will avoid, we need to know how, and more importantly—" She looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes in turn. "Those people have been through hell. They've been alone, hiding in the dark, thinking the entire galaxy had been destroyed. We are going to show them that they are not alone." The rescue operation launched within hours. I watched from the station's command center as human ships, sleek, utilitarian vessels that bore no comparison to the elegant warships of the Concorde, slipped into faster-than-light travel and vanished toward enemy territory. They were volunteers, every one of them. Admiral Chen had made that clear. No one would be ordered into holospace, and every single crew had stepped forward. I stayed awake for 3 days, monitoring the mission's progress. The human officer next to me, a young woman named Lieutenant Commander Yusuf, eventually noticed my exhaustion and brought me a nutrient drink synthesized to Vathari specifications. "You should rest," she said. "They won't be back for another 18 hours at minimum."
"I cannot rest," I said. "Not while your people are risking their lives in territory we abandoned."
She smiled slightly. "They're not risking their lives for territory. They're risking their lives for people. There's a difference."
I considered her words. "Your species confuses me, Lieutenant Commander." "We confuse ourselves sometimes," she admitted. "But I've learned that confusion isn't always a bad thing. It means you're still learning."
The rescue ships returned 22 hours later, their holds filled with survivors from 17 different species. Some I recognized, fragments of Concorde civilizations I had thought completely destroyed. Others I had never seen before, species from remote sectors who had never registered on our charts. All of them bore the same expression when they disembarked: disbelief, gratitude, and something else, something I had seen in my own reflection without recognizing it. Hope. Among the rescued was a Vathari elder, one of the few survivors of the Remembrance Council who had not escaped with our fleet. I recognized her immediately. Kethma Sorin, the keeper of the 7th Archive, my former superior. She had been ancient when I was young, her skin so faded that her luminescence barely flickered. I pushed through the crowd to reach her, catching her arm as she stumbled down the gangway. "Keeper," I gasped, "you survived! How?" She looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes that I had never seen in all my centuries of knowing her. She had always been distant, controlled, the embodiment of Vathari stoicism. Now her eyes were wet with tears that our species was not supposed to shed. "They came for us," she whispered. "We had given up. We were waiting to die. And then these little creatures appeared in their little ships, and they said—" She choked on the words. "They said, 'We heard you were in trouble. We came to help.'" She collapsed against me, and I held her as she wept. Around us, similar scenes played out across the docking bay. Survivors reuniting with refugees they had thought lost. Members of species that had been enemies for millennia, embracing each other in shared relief. Humans moving through the crowd with blankets and food and medical supplies, asking nothing, demanding nothing, simply helping. It was in that moment, I think, that I finally began to understand. 5 days before the Hollow were projected to arrive, Admiral Chen called a final briefing. This time, the room was packed, not just with officers and advisors, but with representatives from every species that had found refuge on the station. Hundreds of beings, crowded together in a space designed for dozens. Admiral Chen stood at the podium, and I saw that same calm on her face that I had seen in our first meeting. But now I recognized what lay beneath it.
Not arrogance, not denial, acceptance and determination.
5 days, she said. That's what we have. 5 days to prepare for the most significant moment in the history of our galaxy. She paused. I'm not going to pretend that our chances are good. Everything we know about the Hollow suggests that they are beyond our power to defeat. Civilizations far more advanced than ours have tried and failed. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw fear on the faces of refugees who had already lost everything. But I also saw something else, a desperate hunger for hope, any hope. But I'm also not going to stand here and tell you that we have no chance at all, Admiral Chen continued, because that would be a lie, and more importantly, it would be an insult to everyone in this room who has survived against impossible odds, who has found strength they didn't know they had, who has refused to give up even when giving up was the only logical option. She looked around the room, meeting eyes from a dozen different species.
We have learned things about the Hollow that no one else has had the chance to learn. We have developed tools that have never been tested against this enemy. We have unified resources and knowledge from across the galaxy in ways that have never been attempted before. She straightened. And we have something else. Something that can't be measured or quantified or analyzed. We have each other.
She touched a control, and the holographic display activated. What it showed made my breath catch in my throat. Ships, hundreds of them, thousands. Human vessels, yes, but also ships from every refugee species that had found harbor on the station. Crytheni warships, hastily repaired, Mallory cruisers retrofitted with human technology, Shenthi research vessels armed with weapons that should never have been built, Bethari scouts that I recognized from our own decimated fleet. And at the center of the formation, something I had never seen before. A station. No, a ship. Massive beyond anything I had imagined humanity capable of building, bristling with weapons and sensors and systems I could not identify. This is the Unity Fleet, Admiral Chen said. Every ship we could muster, every weapon we could build, every soul who was willing to stand and fight. She paused. It's not enough. By any rational analysis, it's not nearly enough. The Hollow have consumed forces 1,000 times our size without slowing down. She looked directly at me, and I felt the weight of her gaze. But rationality has already failed. Logic has already lost. The powers of the galaxy tried to defeat the Hollow with superior force, superior technology, superior wisdom. They were erased. We are going to try something different. What? Someone asked. What can we possibly try that hasn't already failed? Admiral Chen smiled, and there was something fierce in it. Something that reminded me of predators I had studied in my long career. Something that made me understand, for the first time, why humanity had survived when so many other species had not. We're going to try compassion, she said. We're going to try unity. We're going to try standing together, not because it's strategically optimal, but because it's right. Because even if we fail, even if we are erased like everyone else, at least we will have shown the universe that there was a species that refused to face the darkness alone, that chose to face it together. The room was silent. I looked around at the gathered beings, Grypheni warriors, Malori mystics, Shenthi scientists, Vathari scholars, and humans. So many humans, with their strange soft faces and their inexplicable determination. And then the Crytheni commander who had challenged Admiral Chen weeks ago rose from her seat. Her translator hummed as she spoke. "We will fight with you," she said. "Not for hope, not for survival, but because you came for our people when we had been abandoned. You showed us that the galaxy was not yet empty of honor." She turned to face the crowd. "The Krytheni stand with humanity."
The Malori delegation rose next, then the Shenthi, then species I didn't know, and species I had thought extinct, and species that had been enemies for millennia.
I found myself rising too, and when I spoke, my voice carried across the room with a strength I had not felt in months.
"The Vathari stand with humanity," I said, "not because we believe we will win, but because for the first time in 11,000 years, we have met a species that makes us wish to be better than we were."
Admiral Chen bowed her head slightly, a gesture of respect, I realized, adapted from some human custom. When she looked up, her eyes were bright.
"Then let's get to work," she said. "We have a universe to save."
The final days passed in a blur of activity. I worked alongside humans and refugees from a dozen species, contributing what I could to preparations I barely understood. I watched as the Unity fleet assembled, as weapons were calibrated and shields were tested, and crews drilled for scenarios that had no precedent in galactic history.
I watched and I wondered.
The night before the Hollow were projected to arrive, I found Admiral Chen alone on the observation deck, staring out at the stars. She did not turn as I approached, but she spoke.
"Remembrancer, I was hoping you'd come."
"You were?"
"I wanted to thank you for your support, for your knowledge, for standing with us when you had every reason to believe we were leading you to certain death." She smiled slightly. "For being willing to believe we might not be the primitive fools the galaxy assumed."
"I have not believed that for some time," I admitted, "though I confess I still do not fully understand you."
"Neither do we." She was quiet for a moment. "There's a human concept. It doesn't translate well to other languages. Most species don't have a word for it. We call it hope. Not optimism. Optimism is believing that things will probably work out. Hope is different. Hope is choosing to believe that things might work out, even when the evidence says otherwise. It's irrational, it's illogical, and somehow it's the most powerful thing we have."
I considered her words. The Vathari have no equivalent concept. We were, a species of calculation. We believed what the evidence supported.
"And look where that got you," she said, not unkindly. "Look where it got everyone. The Concord calculated that the Hollow could not be defeated, so they focused on escape rather than resistance. They calculated that humanity was too primitive to matter, so they ignored our warnings. They calculated their way to extinction."
"And you calculate differently?"
"We don't calculate at all, not when it matters." She turned to face me. "Tomorrow, we're going to face something that has destroyed everything in its path. We're going to face it with a fraction of the force that's already failed, and we're going to win."
"How can you possibly know that?"
She smiled, and it was not the smile of confidence or certainty. It was the smile of someone who had made a choice and intended to see it through, regardless of the odds.
"I don't know it. I believe it. And tomorrow, I'm going to need you to believe it too."
The Hollow arrived at 0347 hours station time. I was on the command deck of the Unity, the massive human vessel I had seen in the holographic display. Admiral Chen had insisted that representatives from each species be present for what she called the decisive moment. I had expected to be relegated to an observer's position, watching from a safe distance as humans did whatever it was they intended to do.
Instead, I found myself standing at Admiral Chen's side, part of a command staff that included representatives from every species in the fleet.
The hollow did not look like anything. That was the first thing I noticed. They did not have a shape, a form, a presence that could be described in conventional terms. They were an absence, a place where the stars should have been, but were not. A void that moved, that hungered, that consumed.
And they were vast beyond imagining. The sensor readings told us that we faced a front approximately 200 light-minutes across. An entire stellar system's worth of nothing, advancing at speeds that should have been impossible.
I felt the fear that had become my constant companion since the fall of Vethanyar Prime. I felt the certainty of failure that had settled into my bones over months of running and hiding and watching everything I loved turn to ash. And then I heard Admiral Chen's voice, calm and steady, carrying across the bridge.
All ships, this is Unity Actual. Begin Phase 1. Projection platforms, activate on my mark.
Across the fleet, systems hummed to life. The technology they had developed from the hollow fragment, the tools they had built in secret, preparing for a threat they had no reason to believe they could face, began broadcasting into the void. I watched the sensors, expecting nothing, hoping for something, and what I saw made me question everything I had understood about the nature of the universe.
The hollow hesitated. For the first time in recorded history, the all-consuming void that had erased the Concord hesitated. The advance slowed. The edge of the formation wavered like a wave uncertain of whether to break against a shore.
"It's working," the Shenthi scientist breathed. "By all the forces, it's working."
Phase 2, Admiral Chen commanded. All ships advance. Let them see us.
The Unity fleet moved forward, into the space between the hollow and the station. I expected to feel terror as we approached that wall of nothing, but what I felt was something else entirely. Something I had not felt since I was young, before I had learned that the universe was cold and indifferent and hostile to life.
I felt awe.
Not at the hollow, though they were terrible beyond description. At the humans, at the small, fragile, impossibly young beings who had looked at the end of all things and said simply, no.
The battle, if it could be called a battle, lasted for 7 hours. It was unlike any conflict I had witnessed in my long career. There were no exchanges of weapons fire, no tactical maneuvers, no casualties in the conventional sense. Instead, there was a strange, silent dance between the Unity fleet and the Hollow. The humans broadcast their signals, and the Hollow responded. Not with communication, they were still beyond language, beyond understanding, but with behavior, with reaction.
With something that looked, impossibly, like recognition.
I watched as the Hollow probed our lines, testing the edges of our formation. I watched as human ships repositioned in response, always maintaining the broadcast, always presenting a unified front. I watched as the Krytheni and Malori and Vathari vessels held steady alongside their human allies, moving in concert as if they had trained together for years rather than days.
And slowly, impossibly, I watched the Hollow begin to withdraw. Not in defeat. I did not believe they could be defeated in any conventional sense, but in recognition, as if they had encountered something they had not expected, something that made them reconsider their advance.
"Admiral," the tactical officer reported, their voice tight with disbelief. "The Hollow formation is retreating. They're pulling back toward the Galactic Core."
Admiral Chen did not celebrate. She did not relax. She stared at the sensor display with an intensity that suggested she was seeing something the rest of us could not. "Maintain formation," she said quietly.
Continue broadcast. And someone get me the Shenthi research team. I want to know exactly what just happened. What had happened, we learned in the hours that followed, was something no one had anticipated. The Hollow, according to the best theories we could develop, were not invaders in the conventional sense. They were not conquerors or destroyers or even enemies. They were more like a natural phenomenon, a cosmic immune response, perhaps, a mechanism for recycling civilizations that had grown too powerful, too stagnant, too disconnected from the fundamental forces of life.
The Concord had been old, ancient beyond imagining, and in their age they had become calcified, static. They had stopped growing, stopped changing, stopped evolving. They had become monuments to their own achievements, preserved in amber, no longer truly alive.
The Hollow had come to end them, not out of malice, but out of necessity. As a forest fire clears dead wood to make way for new growth, as winter kills the plants of autumn to prepare the soil for spring.
And humanity, young, chaotic, ever-changing humanity, had presented the Hollow with something unexpected, a civilization that was still growing, still changing, still alive in a way that the ancient powers had forgotten how to be.
The Hollow had not retreated in defeat. They had retreated in recognition, in acknowledgement that this particular corner of the galaxy was not yet ready for clearing, that there was still life here worth preserving.
Or at least, that was the theory. The truth, we suspected, was far more complex. But it was enough. For now, it was enough. In the days that followed, the Unity fleet patrolled the borders of holospace, broadcasting signals that kept the Great Absence at bay. Slowly, cautiously, rescue operations expanded into territories that had been written off as lost. More survivors were found, more refugees brought to safety, more pieces of shattered civilizations gathered and preserved. And in the center of it all, humanity continued to confuse and amaze me.
They did not claim victory. They did not demand tribute or acknowledgement or gratitude. They simply continued doing what they had been doing all along, helping, listening, building. 3 months after the Hollow's withdrawal, Admiral Chen called me to her office. She looked tired, older than she had seemed when we first met, the strain of months of impossible decisions weighing on her shoulders. But her eyes were still bright.
"Remembrancer," she said, "I have a proposal for you."
I am listening. We are going to rebuild, not just the station or the fleet, but the entire structure of galactic civilization. The Concord is gone, but the need it filled, the need for cooperation, for communication, for unity, that need remains. She leaned forward. I want you to help design what comes next.
I stared at her. You want me, a remembrancer of the Vathari ascendancy, to help design a new galactic order?
I want you, Kethvalanor, who has watched civilizations rise and fall for 4,000 years, to help us avoid the mistakes of the past. The Concord failed because it was built on self-interest. It grew old and static because it had no mechanism for change. We need to build something different, something that can grow, something that can adapt, something that values unity not as a strategic advantage, but as a fundamental principle.
And you believe you can build such a thing after everything you have seen?
She smiled, and again I saw that fierce determination that defined her species. I believe we can try, and if we fail, we try again and again, until we get it right or the universe runs out of stars. That's what humanity does, Remembrancer. We fail, we adapt, we try again.
I thought about her words for a long moment. I thought about the Vathari ascendancy,
11,000 years of wisdom reduced to 300,000 refugees. I thought about the Concord, a structure that had seemed eternal, erased in 18 months. I thought about all the knowledge I had accumulated, all the patterns I had observed, all the certainties I had clung to. And I thought about a young species that had answered a call not meant for them because they believed it was the right thing to do.
"Very well," I said. "I will help you."
Admiral Chen smiled.
"Welcome to the project, Remembrancer. I have a feeling it's going to be an interesting few centuries."
That was 117 years ago by human reckoning. I am older now, ancient by Vathari standards, though I suspect I have many centuries left. I have watched the new order take shape, built on principles I once would have dismissed as naive. I have seen species that were enemies learn to work together. I have seen civilizations that were destroyed begin to rebuild. I have seen the galaxy fill once again with light and life and the beautiful chaos of existence. And I have watched humanity. Always I have watched humanity. They are different now than they were when I first arrived on Meridian Station. A century of interstellar cooperation has changed them, expanded them, matured them in ways that would have been impossible in isolation. They have learned from the ancient species they saved, absorbed wisdom that took millennia to accumulate. They have grown into their role as caretakers of a fragile peace.
But at their core, they remain unchanged. They remain the species that heard a call not meant for them and answered anyway. The species that looked at the end of all things and said, "Not today." The species that survived not because they were the strongest or the wisest or the most advanced, but because they refused to give up.
Sometimes late at night, I return to the observation deck where I first spoke with Admiral Chen. Sarah, as she asked me to call her before she passed, 3 decades ago now, her brief human lifespan exhausted by a life of service. I look out at the stars, and I think about all that has changed and all that remains the same. And I think about that moment when our distress call went out, aimed at the ancient powers we believed were our only hope, the signal that was never meant for humans, the call that they had no obligation to answer, no reason to acknowledge, no strategic interest in responding to.
They answered anyway.
And in doing so, they saved not just the survivors of the Concord, not just the refugees who found shelter on their stations, not just the civilizations that were rebuilt under their protection. They saved the idea that the universe might be more than a cold, dark, indifferent void. They saved the possibility that compassion could be stronger than calculation, that unity could triumph over self-interest, that hope could survive even the death of empires.
I have spent my long life recording the rise and fall of civilizations. I have chronicled the achievements of species that thought themselves eternal. I have watched empires crumble and been trusted with their final memories.
But if I could leave only one record, only one entry in the archives of galactic history, it would be this. The SOS was not meant for humans. They answered anyway, and in answering, they taught us all what it means to be truly alive. The stars are patient teachers. They burn for billions of years, indifferent to the civilizations that rise and fall beneath their light. But sometimes, in the brief flicker of a species' existence, something extraordinary happens, something that makes even the stars take notice. Humanity is that something. And I am grateful beyond words that I lived long enough to see it.